This video is about the Oswald sighting at the downtown Lincoln Mercury shortly before the assassination. I think this is a real sighting. That is, I think somebody, either Oswald or somebody else, did appear at this Lincoln Mercury dealership and acted as if he was shopping for a new car. And so I think it's an important sighting, and I think there's other reasons to think it's important too. On the map here, I have a modern Google map, and I've circled the intersection where the downtown Lincoln Mercury is. According to the FBI document from above, it says downtown Lincoln Mercury at the corner of Industrial and Commerce. Now, the current name of that street has been changed. I think it says Riverfront Boulevard, but in 1963, it was Industrial Avenue. And circled in blue is Dealey Plaza. And these two are very close. Easy walking distance from Dealey Plaza to this downtown Lincoln Mercury dealership. And the document below is from another FBI document. It says, Oswald was in that establishment about a week ago wanting to buy an automobile, according to the witness they're talking about. So that's what this video is about. This is a photograph of Jack Lawrence. He's the witness who alerted the FBI to the fact that Oswald, or someone using that name, had been in the car dealership. And this photo has to be referenced later in the video for one of my wacky theories. And this is chronologically the first document we have referencing the sighting of Oswald at the Lincoln Mercury dealership, dated the day after the assassination. Jack Lawrence, residing at YMCA, Irvay Street, Dallas, Texas, downtown Lincoln Mercury, Commerce and Industrial, telephone there at 11 a.m., 11/23/1963, advised Special Agent Coy Kendall telephonically that Oswald was in that establishment about a week ago and spoke to employees Al Bogard and Frank Pizzo, sales manager, about wanting to buy an automobile. Oswald allegedly told one of these men that he had no money, but then in a couple of weeks he would have money to buy a car for cash. And we're talking about new cars here. And even though the amount of the car, the price of the car is about $3,000, that doesn't sound like a whole lot today. But back then, that would be like probably a $30,000 car today or something like that. So Oswald, this guy who works for $1.25 an hour at the book depository, is telling these car salesmen that he's going to have cash for a new car in a couple of weeks. Agent inquired of Lawrence for home addresses of Bogard and Pizzo in order that they could be later interviewed. He attempted to secure their home addresses. They advised Lawrence that they would speak for themselves. He was unable to obtain from them their addresses. He said they would be working today until 9 p.m. Lawrence said they knew Oswald as a customer and have his name written down. And that would be important if they had his name written down, because it would prove, essentially, unless there's some kind of conspiracy going on, that Oswald had really been there, because who would come in there and tell them that his name was Lee Oswald if his name wasn't Lee Oswald? And Lee Oswald is the only Lee Oswald that we know about being in Dallas in 1963. So it would be important if the name had been written down. But as it turned out, no piece of evidence could be obtained by the authorities from the dealership on which Oswald's name had been written down. So I'll get back to that later. I'm going to stay on the Jack Lawrence thread for a while. And here's one of those compilation FBI documents, which will follow the thread. On November 27th, 1963, The Washington field office advised that on November 26, 1963, Robert D. Johnson, Chief Counsel, Passport Office, Department of State, informed Special Agent Kenneth J. Hazer that a National Broadcasting Corporation, NBC, representative made telephonic inquiry that date, seeking to identify from passport files one Jack Lawrence of Dallas, born about 1939, an alleged associate of Jack Ruby. And as far as I know, this is the only place that ever says anything like that Jack Lawrence was an associate of Jack Ruby. And they don't say where that allegation comes from. The passport files were negative and no additional information had been located regarding Lawrence. On November 28, 1963, Tom Pettit, NBC correspondent, informed Special Agent Joseph B. Abernathy of the Dallas FBI office that he was leaving for New York and stated he had recorded a lengthy interview with Al Bogard. I have never found any interview with Al Bogard conducted by Tom Pettit anywhere, so apparently that was disappeared because I looked thoroughly online for it, and I think if it existed, it would be online. A lengthy interview with Al Bogard, salesman, downtown Lincoln Mercury. Now, Al Bogard is the salesman who dealt with Oswald. Commerce and Industry, Dallas. This interview concerned Oswald's having come in to look at new cars some 2 weeks earlier, and Oswald's being permitted to test drive a new Comet, a Mercury Comet. Pettit quoted Bogard as stating that Jack Lawrence, a former salesman for downtown Lincoln Mercury, had considerable additional information in this regard. So, according to Pettit, in this lengthy interview, which is no longer available, if it ever was available, I can find no evidence that it ever been aired either. I have the feeling, that I can't prove, that the FBI killed this interview somehow. But anyway, Pettit apparently interviewed the salesman who dealt with Oswald, that's Bogard, and Bogard said that Jack Lawrence had considerable additional information in regard to Lee Harvey Oswald. So it's being insinuated here, as hearsay, that Lawrence is involved with Oswald, or that Lawrence has some special information about Oswald. This is never again brought up in the investigation in any of the documents. Even though Jack Lawrence is later interviewed, there's no report of him being asked about what this means, or of Bogard being asked about what this means. So I think it's interesting that this was studiously avoided by the FBI pursuing that insinuation. The following investigation was conducted by Special Agents Tom E. Chapaton, Jr., and Alan H. Smith at Dallas, Texas. On December 5, 1963, Frank Pizzo, assistant sales manager downtown Lincoln Mercury, stated that Jack Lawrence was hired as a salesman on October 22, 1963. And here the investigation, apparently, has turned to Jack Lawrence. He was discharged on November 23, 1963, after another former salesman, Bob Teeter, had told him that Lawrence had received a bad conduct discharge from one of the military services because he had tried to help Fidel Castro when Castro first began to fight Batista in Cuba. So there's an allegation, a hearsay allegation here, that Jack Lawrence is a Castroite. Mr. Pizzo made available an application of Lawrence with the Liberty Mutual Insurance Company for a bond, which had been executed in connection with his employment. The following information was taken from the application. And here we have information about Jack Lawrence, or Jack Allen Carroll Lawrence, his work history mostly. Mr. Pizzo said that Lawrence had applied as a result of an advertisement and had related he had been stranded in Dallas when his car broke down and he had to sell the car. On December 6, 1963, Joe McCree, secretary, YMCA Dallas, stated that Jack Lawrence 1006 First Avenue, Charleston, West Virginia, checked in on October 6, 1963, and checked out on November 30th, 1963, leaving forwarding address as Jack Lawrence, 144 10th Avenue, South Charleston, West Virginia. He occupied room 811 during this time. Mr. McCree was not acquainted with Lawrence and knew of no one else who was. I'll interrupt this document at this moment to present this information. Jack Lawrence, as it says in that document, was at the Y from October 6 to November 30. Lee Harvey Oswald was there on October 3rd, 3 days before Jack Lawrence arrived, apparently. And George McMurray, another character whom I won't explain in this video, was there by October 4th, though we don't know exactly when he started residing there, and at least until November 28th, according to telegrams he received, which is information we do have precise or particular dates on. So I view this as possibly significant that we have persons of interest, including Oswald, staying at the YMCA in Dallas. On December 7th, 1963, Robert D. Teeter, used car salesman for Eagle Lincoln Mercury, 5211 Lemon Avenue, that's a different dealership, stated that he had formerly been employed as a salesman for downtown Lincoln Mercury and had met Jack Lawrence during this employment, since Lawrence was also a salesman. On one occasion, date not remembered, but which was prior to the assassination of the president, he and Lawrence had gone out together one evening and had a few drinks. He could not recall any of the details of their conversation during this evening out, but said that he did remember Lawrence telling him he had gotten a bad conduct discharge when he had tried to help Fidel Castro, when Castro first began to fight Batista in Cuba. He said he did not remember other statements made by Lawrence, but did recall Lawrence had been very emphatic about some of his ideas. Teeter said that this had come to his attention because somebody at downtown Lincoln Mercury had recognized Oswald as having been in that agency to see about a car, and all the ensuing publicity about Oswald being an admirer of Castro. Teeter said the last he heard, Lawrence had gone back to West Charleston, or that would be South Charleston, West Virginia, where his wife was living, address unknown. Well, that's interesting. Lawrence's wife is living in West Virginia while he's living in Dallas, Texas. What's that all about? Lawrence was born in 1938, so at the time of the assassination, he'd be 25 years old. So he's a 25-year-old husband living in a different state than his wife lives in. And prior to Dallas, he had been living in Florida. But his wife lives in West Virginia. This material comes from a latter-day interview by Sheldon Incal of Jack Lawrence. He doesn't quote Jack Lawrence here. He's doing it like an FBI report. He's summarizing or putting in his own words what Lawrence told him. That first one there, Lawrence worked as a handyman, a house painter, a dishwasher, and as a gas station attendant in Charleston, where he met Linda Carroll Hudson in 1959. They were married in April of 1960. And this is after he had been in the Air Force. The next one there, he headed off to Florida in search of employment, leaving Linda temporarily behind. So when he went to Florida, he left his wife behind. During all this time, I loved my wife and children, and they loved me, he contends. So unsurprisingly, for a 25-year-old, and he was only 22 when he got married, unsurprisingly, he and his wife produced some children. That sort of thing happens in the best of families. So this means that when he went to Florida, he left his wife and children behind in West Virginia, and he was in Florida for at least a full year, and perhaps longer. It's not clear exactly when he went back to Charleston, West Virginia, but sometime during May and September of 1963, he was back in West Virginia. It's not clear when he left Florida, but he was at least a year in Florida while his family was left behind in West Virginia. And he's only 23, 24 years old during that period. Presumably he's healthy and horny at that age, and he leaves his family behind in West Virginia while he's in Florida for a year. That's the kind of thing that sounds like would only happen if you were in the service, if you were working for the government in some capacity. One of the places in Florida where Lawrence did find work was at Electronics Communications Incorporated, a St. Petersburg company with many government contracts. And according to his work history, most of his time in Florida was spent working for this company that had many government contracts, about 8 months, according to this. Lawrence worked as an offset press operator in the printing department, printing sensitive manuals that covered such top-secret operations as NASA's named suborbital Mercury and Apollo missile projects, which ECI built the radio systems, or maybe for which ECI built the radio systems for. Oh, there's the for. And Operation Looking Glass, an Air Force operation, and he had served in the Air Force prior to this, which kept B-52s in the air 24 hours a day, always ready for action. He was not at liberty to discuss Operation Looking Glass back in the 60s. This was the sensitive government work he would later allude to in an interview with one of Bernard Fensterwald's investigators. I don't think I've ever seen that interview. And going to the last one that I have boxed in blue, after selling sewing machines at Sears Roebuck in Charleston from May to September of 1963, Jack Lawrence decided to leave West Virginia and to work his way to California. So this will be after he was done with Florida and went on to his mission in Dallas. He says he started his journey early in the second week of October 1963. He headed out in a 1953 Chrysler and ran out of money by the time he hit Texarkana. So he left his family alone in not alone, they were probably living with somebody's parents, but he left his family and was alone, as far as we know, while he was living in Florida for at least a year. And then he went back to West Virginia. And then he started out again to drive across the country, and that's how he ended up in Dallas. So he must have a very understanding wife at this time to let him run around like that as if he was in the service or something. Now, there's been some talk around that Jack Lawrence went to Dallas from New Orleans. That's not his story. That's not what he said in his latter-day interview. And that's not anything he said in any of the FBI document reports of interviews with him. But this is some damned Garrison document. I forget which Garrison document. There were so many of them. This is it doesn't. I'm not saying this proves anything, but it is an official Garrison investigation document, and it states as a fact here: Jack Lawrence was in New Orleans just prior to the assassination. I don't know what that's based upon, but it might be relevant to the next document. This is a September 25th, 1962 FBI document. And at this time, according to Jack Lawrence's story, he was in Florida, working for this government contractor. On 21 September 62, a young man who said that his name was Jack Lawrence called our office and told us a rather fantastic story about his involvement with a Cuban underground organization and possibly with a CIA representative who gave the name of Larry Laborde. And Larry Laborde owned a ship that was used for a CIA operation to resupply and for infiltration operations until 1962 when Laborde was laid off. So this is a real thing. This Jack Lawrence, who called the FBI, is talking about a real person who worked for the CIA, supplying CIA operations in Cuba with a vessel, the Tiana 3. We will not burden you with all of the details, but in summary, Lawrence says that he owns a 78-foot schooner named the LZM Reichert, or Reichert, or maybe it's Reichert, or Reichert, which craft is documented in his name, and that several months ago he made an agreement with Laborde to use the boat in transporting food and medical supplies to the anti-Castro forces of Cuba. Laborde, according to Lawrence, provisioned the vessel for a trip to Miami, Florida, was paid for some necessary and rather extensive repairs to the hull and rigging. The schooner, with Lawrence in command and with a crew of 2 other young men from New Orleans, set sail from here, and after a number of adventures finally arrived in Miami. By that time, Lawrence and the other 2 crew members were completely out of funds, and they were unsuccessful in obtaining any relief from the contracts that they had been told to make in Miami. Since his return to New Orleans, which was accomplished by money sent to him by his mother, Lawrence has been unable to make contact with Laborde, although he understands that Laborde's wife and son are still living at their home in New Orleans. Lawrence was uncertain about the address, but it is probably located at 219 South Pierce Street. The New Orleans City Directory lists at that address one Lawrence J. Laborde, and that's the right one that works for the CIA, whose occupation is given as engineer. Lawrence is very anxious to know what he should do with his schooner, which is presently moored in the Miami River at a cost of $6 per day. He would like to go ahead with his project of ferrying food and medical supplies to the anti-Castro forces if CIA is still interested. If not, he would like to dispose of the schooner for something in the neighborhood of $9,500. He states that he paid for it. We have never had any contact with Laborde. This is the FBI talking, not the CIA, and we do not know of course, whether he is a CIA representative. If he was or is representing the agency, it may be that there is still interest in Lawrence and his boat. If so, the something or other representatives may wish to tell Lawrence whether or not they are still interested in his project. Lawrence's home address is at 213 Marguerite Road, Metairie, Louisiana, and his telephone number is Vernon whatever. He was born on 12 January 33 at Galveston, Texas, and is presently unemployed. And, of course, our Jack Lawrence from Dallas was not born in Galveston, according to his story, and he was born 5 years after that. So if this is not a lie from this young man on the telephone to the FBI, then it would be a different person. But I'm not sure it's a different person. We suggested to Lawrence that his project was probably in violation of the Neutrality Act, but he said that he had checked with the FBI and that, in fact, the FBI sent him to us. We have no personal interest in Lawrence, but he appears to have got a rather raw deal in this matter, and we sympathize with him. If we can give him any definite information which will help him to recoup some of his financial expense in the matter, we should be happy to do so. Okay, well, I don't know if this is the same Jack Lawrence or not. But if he was doing little jobs for the CIA, then that might explain why he would be leaving his young family for months at a time, and why his wife might put up with it. And now back to the official story documents. This is December 13th, 1963 FBI report. Jack A. Lawrence, who is presently staying at the home of his parents-in-law at 144 10th Ave, South Charleston, West Virginia, was advised that he was being contacted in connection with a phone call he had made to the Dallas, Texas office of the FBI the day after the assassination of President Kennedy. Mr. Lawrence was asked what he knew about Jack L. Ruby, and he said he knew nothing about this man, had never seen him, and had had no contact in any way with him. He said that he had heard a great deal about him, which was all second-hand and which was general knowledge around Dallas. He said he had heard that Ruby was a close friend of the sheriff of Dallas County, as well as a close friend of newspaper people, especially since he was in the office of the Dallas Morning News at the time of the assassination. He said he had also heard that Ruby knew members of the Dallas police very well. He said all of this he had heard after the shootings, and that none of it was first-hand knowledge to him. Mr. Lawrence was asked what he knew about Lee Harvey Oswald, and he said he had never known or seen this man and had never heard of him until his arrest after the assassination. He said that he had called the FBI office in Dallas, Texas, because of an incident which occurred, about which those who knew of it first-hand would not report same, and he felt that all such information should be reported. He said that he called the FBI right in front of those involved, and as a result, his leaving his employment in Dallas at the downtown Lincoln Mercury Company was speeded up and occurred the same day he made the call. Mr. Lawrence said that right after the assassination of President Kennedy and the arrest of Oswald, the assistant sales manager Pizzo, and notice he says, right after the assassination of President Kennedy and the arrest of Oswald. From this language, you would think that he means the day of the assassination, but the FBI keeps repeatedly saying, in this and other documents, that he called the day after the assassination. But going back to the latter-day interview by Sheldon Incal, according to Incal, Jack Lawrence said that he called on November 22nd, the day of the assassination. Lawrence remembers news of Officer J.D. Tippett's murder and Lee Harvey Oswald's arrest being broadcast over the television in the showroom. By late afternoon, pictures of Oswald were broadcast as well as some of the aliases he used. Lawrence believes that Oswald did visit downtown Lincoln Mercury before the assassination because Bogard was genuinely affected by the news. Eugene Wilson corroborated the visit, and Bogard even produced the business card upon which he had written the name of his infamous customer. So Lawrence is saying that Bogard had a business card, on which he had written Oswald's name. Lawrence cannot remember whether the name on the card was that of Oswald Heidel or O.H. Lee. In the FBI report of their interview with Lawrence in 1964, the agents reported that Lawrence did not see Bogard produce such a business card. This may be an indication of dishonest FBI efforts to discredit Bogard's story. Lawrence felt that they should report Oswald's visit to the FBI. Pizzo and Teeter felt that a connection to Oswald could hurt downtown Lincoln Mercury and did not want to report it, while Bogard was just a flake who did not want to get involved. Lawrence announced that he was going to make the call anyway. Contrary to what FBI agent Edwin D. Kai Kendall reported, Lawrence claims to have phoned the FBI between 6 and 8 on the evening of the assassination, and not at 11 a.m. the next morning. The FBI documents all say he called the next day, and here it says he called at 11 a.m. the next morning. So the FBI is lying about this because the FBI doesn't want to find that business card with Oswald's name on it. The FBI doesn't want Oswald to have been here, or anyone using Oswald's name to have been here, because that would would mean they would have to explain Oswald being there or somebody else using his name being there, and they wanted to keep their story simple. So that's why the FBI repeatedly lies about the time at which Lawrence called. It's because they didn't want to find this business card. If he called when that business card was still in the trash can and the FBI went over, which they would be expected to have done, then there's no way they could say the card was no longer there. But coming the next day, after Bogart had thrown it in the trash, means the trash could have been emptied and taken away, and that gives them an excuse for not finding the card with Oswald's name on it. He was looking at the assistant sales manager Pizzo and a salesman, Al Bogart, talked about Oswald being there about 10 days before. He was looking at a $3,500 Comet Caliente sports car, fully equipped. He took one of these cars, a demonstrator belonging to salesman Gene Wilson, for a test drive. This drive took place along the same route taken when President Kennedy came to Dallas and covered the route where he was assassinated. At the same time, the salesman wrote up papers covering the sale of the car to Oswald, but he told them he was not taking the car at that time, but he would be back in 3 weeks to get the car, and he would pay for it in full, in cash. Mr. Lawrence said he knew nothing further about Oswald, but felt this should be reported to the FBI, even though the others would not report it. Mr. Lawrence said that in January 1959 he was in the service, and that at that time Castro was overthrowing the government in Cuba. He said he and his others in the service were very much in favor of Castro's actions, and they wanted to go down and help him. Now, he's responding to this report that Teeter told about him. But he said that he was not discharged from the service until it was too late to go down and do any good. He said that now he is glad he did not help Castro because he no longer favors what he has done or what he stands for. He said he is opposed to what Castro stands for now and would not help him under any circumstances. And now I'm going to move along to this January 7th FBI document, which is a report of an interview with Jim A. Roselli, Secretary Treasury, downtown Lincoln, Mercury. Jim A. Roselli, or not Roselli, with the money store, no doubt. Jim A. Rosell, Secretary Treasurer, downtown Lincoln, Mercury, 118 East Commerce, said Ike Huskins terminated his employment with downtown Lincoln, Mercury on December 31st, 1963, and he currently resides at 105 Curvin, blah, 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 where his telephone is who cares. He said that Dale Tennell is still employed in the service department of the company. I don't know why any of that means anything to anybody. It doesn't mean anything to me. Second paragraph. Mr. Rosell said he wanted to furnish other information that he believed pertinent to the investigation of this case, and he then related that Jack Allen Carroll Lawrence, a former employee, left the business about 1 hour before lunch on November 22nd, 1963, and he returned about 30 minutes after the assassination of President Kennedy, and was observed to be extremely pale and nervous, and immediately went to a restroom. No doubt I will get back to this eventually. I'm reading all the documents here. I realize this is not particularly entertaining video, but I want to supply the primary evidence for things I say here, so that people, if they really care and want to check out what I'm saying with the documents, they can do so. I don't know how many people really care that much. But anyway, this is what I'm doing, whether you like it or not. When he returned to the sales floor, he said that Lawrence told other employees he had left his demonstrator, that is, the car he was driving from the dealership, near the scene of the assassination, and was reluctant to discuss anything about the assassination. So clearly here this Rosell fellow is insinuating that Lawrence's behavior made him very suspicious regarding the assassination, as if Lawrence was involved some way with the assassination. He said, in addition to this information about Lawrence, a Mr. Bob Teeter, Robert D. Assistant Sales Manager, came to him, Mr. Rosell, and said that Lawrence had been following him at night, and that he had observed Lawrence was a political fanatic, and had remarked that he was discharged from the Army for wanting to go and fight for Castro while he, Lawrence, was in Florida. Now, you take things like this with a grain of salt. It sounds a little crazy, like Mr. Teeter is a little crazy and gets things wrong. But it might mean something. Maybe Lawrence was following him. Maybe Lawrence was doing investigative work for his real employer, whoever that may have been. Who knows? He said Lawrence returned the day following the assassination and was mad and nervous, and said he called the FBI and told them that the downtown Lincoln Mercury dealership was withholding information from the FBI. That could be an interpretation of the material we've already covered, a very wacky interpretation, but that might be what he's talking about. Mr. Rizal said that he recalled Bill Fowler and Frank Pizzo had been advised by Lawrence on the Monday before the assassination of the president that Lawrence was leaving on Saturday, the day following the assassination, to drive a car to California. He said he seemed to remember that this was a rent-a-car or a similar deal. He said in view of the nervous condition of Lawrence on November 22, 1963, Mr. Pizzo had talked to Lawrence to attempt to determine the name of the company that Lawrence was driving the car for, and Lawrence was unable to establish this, but said he would pick up the car on the street and drive it from there. And this in turn caused him, Rizal, to telephone the FBI and report his observations of Lawrence's behavior. Mr. Rizal said that a salesman named Bogard and Mr. Pizzo had furnished information to the FBI regarding the contemplated purchase of a Comet by a person believed to be identical with Lee Harvey Oswald, and two pairs of agents had interviewed Mr. Bogard concerning this. He advised that the city Lincoln Mercury dealership had been out of business in Dallas since about 1960 or 1961, and he said he had no information concerning Lee Harvey Oswald or Jack Ruby. So to summarize what I think is important in that document, and there's other things there that could be examined, but Jack Lawrence, according to Rizal, Jack Lawrence left work before the assassination and returned after the assassination and was nervous and extremely pale and immediately went to a restroom. In the latter-day interview that I've been citing, Jack Lawrence does not deny this. Lawrence did hurry into the downtown Lincoln Mercury showroom about 30 minutes after the assassination, so that he would be on time for his 1 o'clock shift. He calls statements made afterwards by his co-workers to the effect that Lawrence was upset and covered in mud, and that he ran to the restroom and threw up, drivel and false nonsense. He says that he could have been a bit flushed and warm from the fast-paced walk to the work. So he doesn't deny going to the restroom even. He denies throwing up in the restroom. I don't know where those comments come from that he's talking about, but he doesn't deny that he left work before the assassination. He says he did, and that he returned a half hour afterwards. He says he did. He denies that he was nervous and upset, I guess. But he doesn't deny that he was pale and immediately went to a restroom. And I'm not sure we should believe anything Lawrence says that contradicts what other people say about him anyway. So I take this as a true observation by Rizal, and I will refer to it later in the video. And now going to the last of the FBI interview reports regarding Jack Lawrence. And this is a weirdly late interview report from September 16th, 1964. The FBI didn't do many of these sorts of interviews. This would have been after the Warren Commission could have done anything with it, probably. On September 14th, 1964, Jack A. Lawrence was re-interviewed and advised that he did not know and had never seen Lee Harvey Oswald. He said that the day after the assassination, which I have underlined because the FBI says this, of President Kennedy. A group of salesmen at downtown Lincoln Mercury in Dallas, Texas, including Mr. Bogart, Mr. Pizzo himself, and others, were standing around listening to a radio in the sales room when the news that Oswald had been arrested for the assassination came over the air. Now, what I have underlined here is once again to emphasize this point that I brought up before, that the FBI is repeatedly insisting that Jack Lawrence claimed that he saw the business card and called the FBI the day after the assassination. But the news that Oswald had been arrested for the assassination came over the air on November 22nd, the day of the assassination. It wasn't the day after the assassination. And this is one point where I believe Lawrence, because his story makes more sense. That is that he called the FBI on the day of the assassination, not the day after the assassination. And I've already gone over why that was important, and I probably will deal with it again in summary. When the name Oswald was spoken, Mr. Bogart said Oswald was the man who had been in downtown Lincoln Mercury about 10 days before to look at the cars and was to return later concerning buying one. This was the first time that Mr. Lawrence knew that Oswald had been in the automobile agency and was a prospective customer of the firm. Mr. Lawrence said that at no time did he see Mr. Bogart take any papers or card out of his pocket and hear him say the name of Oswald was on them. I don't know if that's accurate or if the FBI is just making that up. He said that Mr. Pizzo told Mr. Bogart to go get the papers on Oswald, but Mr. Bogart never did do this. He said that whenever they have a prospective customer, it is a rule of the firm that they take the name and address of the prospect and write up a possible sale on paper in each case, even though no sale is actually made. This gives them prospects for possible future sales. These papers are filed and maintained for some period of time. He said he never saw any papers that had been drawn up with Oswald as a prospective buyer, and that Mr. Bogart never did go get the papers, if there were any. Mr. Lawrence continued that during the conversation among the men at the time they were listening to the radio, someone, he believes it was Mr. Bogart, said that he had used Mr. Wilson's demonstrator when Oswald was in, and that he and Oswald took a ride in Wilson's car on the day Oswald was there. After this conversation, Mr. Lawrence said that he told Mr. Bogart and Mr. Pizzo that they should call the FBI and give them this information because everyone should cooperate in helping to clear up this matter. He said that when he suggested this, Mr. Bogart seemed to be a little nervous and walked off, but would not make the call. He told Mr. Pizzo that he was going to call the FBI, and Mr. Pizzo was in favor of the call. Therefore, he called the FBI, reporting the above concerning Oswald, and that then Mr. Pizzo became miffed and appeared to be angry that the call had been made. Mr. Lawrence said that shortly thereafter, William Fowler, the big boss, called him into his office, and he had a check from Mr. Lawrence, telling him that his services had been good, and they would like to keep him, but since he had already given notice and had decided to leave in a few days, they felt it best that he leave then, and he was paying Mr. Lawrence what was due him. This action caused Mr. Lawrence to believe that Mr. Pizzo had gone to Mr. Fowler and told him about the call to the FBI, and that Mr. Fowler had let him go right away instead of letting him stay on to the end of the month as he had planned when he gave notice he was leaving. Mr. Lawrence said that on the day of the assassination, he felt rather bad because he had been out late the night before. He did go down to a sales meeting that morning, but left afterwards driving in his assigned demonstrator to the YMCA, where he stayed in Dallas, so he could get some rest and sleep. So he's saying he left work in the morning because he wanted to go home and sleep, even when he had to be back there at 1 in the afternoon. He said that right after noon he was on his way back to the downtown Lincoln Mercury Company and was going along the same way that the presidential party had ridden when he approached Now, I don't know if this is possible because he says he's following the parade route. And, of course, the police had blocked off the parade route. And then after the president went by, the streets were full of people. So this story might not even be possible that he drove the same route the president took, about a half an hour afterwards. I don't know. When he approached the place where the assassination took place, the police stopped all traffic and he could go no farther. He said since he was due back at the salesroom, he parked the car because he could go no farther and walked the rest of the way. Now here he's saying he parked the car near the site of the assassination. In the latter day interview I've been referring to, he says something else about that. Yeah, here he says, Lawrence left the YMCA between 12:35 and 12:40. He found that as I pulled from the parking lot where I parked my car across from the YMCA onto Irvay and drove a few yards toward Main Street, I encountered gridlock traffic. In anticipation of the motorcade, the police had stopped traffic on Main Street and the connecting arteries. Therefore, after the passing of the motorcade, this dammed-up traffic created gridlock on the only route I could get to work. I pulled my car to the curb at the corner of Irvay and Main and proceeded to work, probably walk, about 1 mile distant on foot. So this is a different story than what he told the FBI in 1964, where he said he parked near the site of the assassination. Now his story has changed, where he parked near the YMCA because he couldn't drive down the streets. So I think both are probably lies. He probably parked near the site of the assassination because he was involved with the assassination. He was one of the conspiracy tools on site for the assassination. That's what I think. He said he was nervous mainly because of his having been out on the town the night before. Okay, he's admitting he was nervous now, as Roselle said he was the night before, because of the shock of learning the president's assassination. And after the assassination, Jack Lawrence went into the religion business as a evangelical pastor, and apparently he made a big stink about opposing Freemasonry. And this is the same guy. This is a 2018 newspaper article. I'm not going to read that. And apparently this is his church, and he's the Reverend Jack A.C. Lawrence, pastor, in 2015. And there's actually a video online from 2017 that shows Jack Lawrence doing his religion thing. And this is the last I looked into Jack Lawrence. I don't know if he's still around or still doing the religion thing, or if he's in an old folks home, or what's going on with Jack. But he's one of these people who lived a long time after the assassination and became very religious. Well, it looks like this video is going to be about Jack Lawrence, contrary to my original intent. I thought I was making a video about the Oswald sighting at the Lincoln Mercury dealership, but it has turned into a video about Jack Lawrence. So, even though I don't have a court case here, but I think I've got enough for an armchair theory. Reasons to think that Jack Lawrence was a spook. He spent months at a time away from his family working for a defense contractor in Florida, according to his story. And because of that letter I read, I said it was to the FBI, but I think it might have been to the State Department. It's not clear to me what that document claims, who it claims to be written by. But anyway, it's some official government document. I think it might be the State Department. He's implicated by a telephone call about working with a CIA operative, Larry Laborde, supporting anti-Castro activities in Cuba. I've gone over that. That's not a definite match to our Jack Lawrence. Jack and Lawrence, of course, are fairly common names. But here it is at the same time, a young man who's got a connection to Florida, has this boat that he acquired for CIA operations in Cuba. So I think it's Jack Lawrence. He says his name is Jack Lawrence, though he does say, apparently, he told these government officials that he was born in Galveston, Texas, which Jack Lawrence was not. So it may be a different Jack Lawrence, but I think it's the same Jack Lawrence. And so this is what I'm working with. I'm very suspicious that Jack Lawrence is working for a government agency of some kind. And more reasons that I'm suspicious about Jack Lawrence is what he did on the day of the assassination. He arrived at the downtown Lincoln Mercury about 30 minutes after the assassination, nervous and allegedly covered in mud. By one of his own accounts, he parked near Dealey Plaza, though he did give another account where he parked somewhere else. That is in itself suspicious. He's giving different stories about where he parked his car. And he apparently lied about his activities in his latter-day interview. I don't know if I should cover that a little more or not, but maybe I'll cover that a little more. I awoke a little before noon, and he's at the YMCA here. I awoke a little before noon and began getting ready to go to work, Lawrence recalls. The shower was down the hall from my room, and returning to my room after my shower, I remembered my shampoo had been left in the shower stall. After dressing, I returned to the shower room to retrieve the shampoo, and upon arriving back to the door of my room, it was there I heard 4 sharp, even reports of gunfire resounding through the city canyons. A black man in the hallway guessed that some joker watching the Kennedy motorcade was throwing firecrackers. This was my first realization that the motorcade was in the area, and my first emotion was anxiety that the traffic would make me late for work. Lawrence tells me that the 4 shots he heard came at uniform intervals. Does this make sense if Lawrence is a mile away at the YMCA, that he casually hears 4 shots from Dealey Plaza? I don't think it makes sense. And maybe if you were listening for 4 shots carefully, you would hear them. I don't know, but if he's just going to get his shampoo and he hears 4 shots a mile away, I don't think, I think he's making up a bullshit story here, and why would he do that? Apparently, a theory has been around for a long time that Jack Lawrence was one of the stepmen. And here are the 3 stepmen from the Muchmore film here. And one of them is supposedly an F. Lee Mudd. I have a question mark there because I'm not convinced by that identification. But that's part of the sort of official story, though the only one of these 3 interviewed by the Warren Commission was the groundskeeper Emmett Hudson. Emmett Hudson was the groundskeeper, and I'm well convinced that is Emmett Hudson that I have pointed out there. And the other one, supposedly, is Jack Lawrence. Now, this is something that Incohl, in the latter-day interview, did ask Jack Lawrence about, and he denied that he was this person on the steps. And I think he was not this person on the steps. But I thought I should mention that theory. That was something that at one time I thought was a credible idea, but now I don't think that's Jack Lawrence. And now I'll go to the Julia Ann Mercer story. She advised at about 10:50 a.m., November 22nd, 1963, so this is about an hour and 40 minutes before the assassination. She was driving a rented white Valiant automobile west on Elm Street toward the triple underpass below Houston Street, and at a point about 45 or 50 feet east of the overhead signs over the right entrance road to the underpass, there was a truck parked on the right-hand side of the road, which truck blocked her progress for a few seconds until the lane left of her cleared and she was able to pass around the truck. This truck appeared to have the two right wheels up on the curb. The hood of the truck was open. On the driver's door, the words air conditioning were printed in black letters, and the words formed a half-moon shape. The truck was a green Ford pickup with Texas license. She advised there was a man sitting under the wheel of the car. She must mean at the wheel of the car, slouched over the wheel. This man was wearing a green jacket and was described as a white male who appeared to be about 40 to 45 years of age and to be of heavy build. She later allegedly identified this man as Jack Ruby, though I'm not convinced that she actually did. But anyway, here's someone who eventually was claimed to have been Jack Ruby at the wheel of this truck parked at the Overpass in Dealey Plaza, from where the Overpass several people thought shots had been fired. Another man was at the back of the truck on the street and was reaching over the tailgate when she drove up. This man took out from the truck what appeared to be a gun case. This case was about 3.5 feet to 4 feet long and about 8 inches wide at the widest point, and about 3, 4, or 5 inches wide at the narrowest point. This case was brown in color and had a handle. The man took this out of the truck and proceeded to walk away, and as he did, the small end of the case caught in the grass or sidewalk, and he reached down to free it. The man then proceeded to walk across the street and up the grassy hill toward the overpass. She said that this is the last she saw of this person. So she says she saw a person carry, apparently, a gun, though she didn't see the gun, she saw the gun case, up to the overpass, where people thought shots had been fired from. She noticed at the time there were 3 policemen standing there talking near a motorcycle on the bridge just west of her. Now, this whole incident is very interesting, and I've made a video about it, but I don't want to investigate this incident too far. I want to concentrate on how she identifies or how she describes this man carrying the gun case. She advised that the man who took the gun case from the truck was a white male in his late 20s or early 30s. Jack Lawrence is 25 at this time, with dark brown hair, suntanned complexion. Jack Lawrence had been in Florida for several months at this time. About 5'9" or 5'10" tall, and weighed about 165 to 170 pounds. He was wearing what appeared to be a gray jacket with brown pants and a plaid shirt. He was also wearing a wool stocking hat with a tassel in the middle of the hat. This is strange attire, I think, for Dallas, Texas. And maybe this person is covering up so that he will not be recognized. But Mercer advised she could identify this man if she saw him again. And I think she later allegedly claimed it was Oswald. I don't know, but I'm suspicious this might be Jack Lawrence carrying a gun up to the overpass where several witnesses thought shots had been fired from. And now I'll go to Lee Bowers, who was in the radio control tower, and he described seeing 3 different cars in the parking lot just a few minutes before the assassination. And the third car he saw, as I have underlined here, the third car, a 1961 or 1962 white Chevrolet Impala 4-door, with an out-of-state plate similar to that which he had observed on the first car, the 1959 Oldsmobile, arrived at about 12:22 p.m. This car had one white male occupant, age about 30, with dirty blonde hair, long on the sides, and wearing a plaid sport coat. So he sees this car with this person driving it in the parking lot about 8 minutes before shots were fired. And he describes this person as wearing a plaid sport coat, about age 30, he says. And this is a pretty good match to what Julia Ann Mercer said about the young man carrying the rifle. She said he had a plaid shirt on, but whether it's a shirt or a coat is something people might not remember correctly, but they might remember the plaid correctly, because that's what's defining this article of clothing. And this person's about the same age. So I think this might be the same person, and I think this person might be Jack Lawrence. Now, I want to provide this photograph with my annotations for those of you who may not be familiar with the geography of Dealey Plaza. That green part in the middle bottom, that's where Julia Ann Mercer saw the young man carry a gun case, presumably with a gun in it, up to the overpass. I have the arrow pointing in the direction that she said he walked, up to the overpass. The little blue spot there is where shots were fired, shots were fired from the overpass. And the red circled area is the parking lot area where Lee Bowers saw this car with the plaid-coated man in it. So, what I'm just pointing out here is that both of these people, where they were seen by the witnesses, could easily be accessing the area from which shots had been fired from the overpass. So the idea is that about an hour and 40 minutes before the president was shot, this person, who I think might be Jack Lawrence, carried the rifle up to the overpass, and presumably, although Julia Ann Mercer had gone on her way and did not see what he did afterwards, presumably he left the scene after he delivered the rifle to the spot or to the area where it was going to be used. And then when Lee Bowers saw this same person, as I'm saying, who I think might be Jack Lawrence, this person was going to the spot so that he could fire that rifle that had already been put there. That's the idea. I guess I have to review this Overpass thing, just in case you haven't seen my videos about it. But as was reported here on the AP wire, is this the API wire? No, this is the UPI wire, apparently. At the top of the hill, a man and a woman appeared huddled on the ground. And so there's a man and a woman huddled, I say, on the overpass, which is at the top of the hill. And Dan Rather reports about this. According to witnesses, they saw this man and woman over the motorcade route. And I must have got this from the David Von Pine YouTube channel. I think that's where I got this.
Still, another witness at the scene said this man was an adult, said he thought he saw a man and a woman crawling along a walkway over the motorcade route, and that this adult said it was possible that that man and woman could have fired the shots.
And on the Dallas Police Radio Channel 1, we can hear a woman say the gun is closed and he aims it just before the president is shot. So what I think this all means is that there's a man and a woman on the overpass. The man has the gun, and he's going to shoot the throat shot, which is the first shot that hit JFK. Well, the first gunshot that hit JFK. I defy you to come up with a better explanation. And I think these people in the foreground, whose backs of the heads we see, are looking at this man and woman making their getaway. Now, I've circled the Hesters here because some people will argue that the man and the woman are the Hesters, but they're not over the motorcade route. as Dan Rather said. They're off to the side over there. You could say they're up a hill a little bit, but I think the Hesters are clearly not the man and the woman huddled who may have fired the shots. I think it's the people who were up there who did fire shots, or the man fired the shots. And I think the man and the woman made their escape through the overpass sewer drain. And I think here in the couch film, you can see that the grate is actually closing, that it's propped up, the open end to the left, that is propped up here in this frame. And in the next frame, the grate suddenly closes. And I think the man and the woman probably made their escape through the sewer drain that was on top of the overpass. And I think these people here watching saw that happening, but we never heard directly from them. And maybe they didn't realize that these people went into the sewer drain up there. Maybe they just didn't know what the hell happened. Now, a trick was played here, and the fact that they were able to perform this trick, I think, shows the extent of this conspiracy, the power it had, the reach it had, where it could control the Dallas police and even people who were railroad workers, and they could control the photography. They had access to the photography before it was made public. And anyway, this is a photograph just a few seconds after the shooting, and that's Officer Haygood, who ran up to the overpass. And to me, it looks like he's obviously standing on something. But the problem is there's nothing underneath his feet. He's just standing on thin air right there. Now, people will argue that he's pulling himself up right here with his hands, one hand on top of the fence, one hand on the concrete there, that he's just pulling himself up from the ground there. But I think that's ridiculous. I think he is obviously standing on something, but that thing he's standing on is no longer in the photograph because this is an altered photograph. And this is a photograph from the other side of the fence, the other side of the overpass. And I think what Haygood must be standing on in that other photograph is the steam pipe. Now, this photograph was taken a few years later, so things have changed a little bit. The steam pipe, I think, used to be lower. You can see, as I've circled here, those holes in the concrete. I think that had some kind of a bracket on it that held the steam pipe. And the steam pipe went across there lower. But now, the steam pipe is behind the fence, as we can see it here. But at the time of the assassination, the steam pipe was in front of the fence, and that's what Officer Haygood is standing on there. So what happened was, during the assassination, the fence... the steam pipe was in front of the fence. And then after the assassination, the fence was moved, or part of the fence was moved forward a little bit, so that the steam pipe would now seem to be behind the fence, or steam pipe was behind the fence after they moved it. But now anyone investigating the matter, going to the scene, will see that the steam pipe is behind the fence, and the grate is behind the fence now. So what happened, they will think could not possibly have happened, because it would have the grate would have to have been in front of the fence for what I say happened to have happened. But it was in front of the fence during the assassination, and on the same day of the assassination, they moved that little piece of the fence forward so that the grate would now be behind the fence. That's the kind of conspiracy we had here. They could control all of this stuff. And here's a photograph from Google Maps, which I used. And I used this to show the overpass drain over on the top right area. I've got circled where the overpass drain was. And over on the other side, the lower left, downtown Lincoln Mercury, where Jack Lawrence worked and where he showed up a half hour after the assassination. And at that intersection where he worked are 4 manhole covers. And it's very unlikely that manhole cover locations would change over the years, because that would be doing unnecessary and costly work to do that. It's possible, but very unlikely that the location of manhole covers would change over the years. As the streets are resurfaced, they're going to keep the entrance locations in the same place, unless they have the necessity to change them. And so what we have here, when the man and the woman enter the sewer through the overpass drain, Jack Lawrence, I think, and probably the woman with him, follow the sewer down to the intersection where he works and exit the manholes there. And that might explain why Jack Lawrence needed to go wash up in the bathroom afterwards, because he had been walking through the sewer system. And these are street drains. It's not like he's swimming through raw sewage.
I've been swimming in raw sewage.
So he's not going to smell like the sewer when he comes in, but
I love it.
he might be a little messy and want to clean up a little bit. And as I have demonstrated in other videos, the Dallas police or elements of the Dallas police were involved with this. And so it could have been arranged to have a police detail at these manhole covers in order to make sure that Jack Lawrence and his friend could exit unseen by curious onlookers. And so I don't have a problem with that. So that would explain Jack Lawrence arriving at work about a half hour after the assassination, being nervous and needing to wash up. He might have been the Overpass shooter. Well, it's about time that I brought Phil Willis into this. Phil Willis, he's the guy who took the Willis photos that I use often. And I don't think I've ever spoken of him in a conspiratorial way before. But I think it's time. Philip L. Willis advised he is self-employed as a real estate broker and has his office in his home. He stated he was born on August 2nd, 1918 in Kaufman County, Texas. Willis stated he is a retired Air Force major. So Willis was in the Air Force, just like Jack Lawrence was a senior pilot, and had 23 months combat experience in the South Pacific from 1941 to 1943. Willis advised he served in the Texas State House of Representatives from 1946 to 1950 from Kaufman County. On November 22, 1963, Willis advised he was employed by Downtown Lincoln Mercury, Incorporated, just like Jack Lawrence, 118 Commerce Street, Dallas, Texas, as an executive salesman for the Lincoln Continental. I guess he sold Lincoln Continentals. They probably still are, the high-end Lincoln car that people who would rather not buy Cadillacs buy instead. He said he was jointly employed by both the Downtown Lincoln Mercury Incorporated and by the Ford Motor Company. He fails to mention here that he was also present at Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So he's a well-known war veteran, and not a household name exactly, but still well-known for that sort of thing. And he worked at the same place that Jack Lawrence worked at. But apparently, according to Sheldon Ingle, Jack Lawrence didn't know Phil Willis, and Phil Willis didn't know Jack Lawrence. From the latter-day interview that I've been quoting in this video, the salesman he was then sharing a booth with, that is, Jack Lawrence was sharing a booth with, offered him a lift. This was to retrieve his car that he had parked somewhere on the day of the assassination. Lawrence says that he cannot now remember this man's name, but he describes him as a retired colonel from California who, for a hobby, wrote novels about the Civil War in such detail that he would even research the kinds of buttons worn on the soldiers' uniforms. At first, Lawrence could not remember which branch of the military that the colonel had served in, and he described him as a balding man in his mid-40s with wavy, reddish-blonde hair. He would later describe the colonel as being retired from the Air Force, 50 to 55 years old, about 5'9" or 5'10" tall, with freckles, sandy to reddish hair that was curly or wavy, and a receding hairline. It could not have been retired Air Force Major Phil Willis, who also worked at the downtown Lincoln Mercury, but was otherwise occupied that afternoon. That is, Phil Willis was at the scene of the assassination taking photos. After having taken several photographs in Dealey Plaza at the time of the assassination, and after the assassination, he went to the Kodak lab to get his film developed, the same place that Zapruder went to, coincidentally, because they were both using Kodachrome, and Kodachrome had to be developed by Kodak. Kodachrome is a kind of film, which was available for transparencies, as Phil Willis was taking transparencies, that is still photography with slides, and Zapruder was taking movie film with Kodachrome, and it was available for both formats because it was a transparency film rather than a negative film. And a negative, well, let's not get into film. Now, finishing up this section of the latter-day interview, Lawrence does not remember Willis, and in return, Willis does not remember Lawrence. And apparently, Sheldon Incoll talked with Phil Willis by telephone, and Willis, according to Incoll, denied knowing Jack Lawrence. So both of them work at the same place, but neither one of them knows each other. Now, it could be that Willis, it probably is that Willis is a rather exclusive sort of salesman. He's probably not spending hours at a time at the dealership the way Jack Lawrence is. But still, I think it's interesting that each one claimed they didn't know the other from their work, even though they worked at the same place. And here I'm continuing with the FBI document report of their interview with Willis. Willis advised he and his family remained in the area, that is Dealey Plaza, approximately an hour or so, and took additional pictures of the assassination site. He said he and his wife then drove directly to the Eastman Kodak Processing Laboratory to have his film developed. Willis stated shortly after he arrived at Eastman Kodak Processing Laboratory, a Mr. Zapruder arrived with some 8mm color film. At about the same time, Willis stated Mr. Forrest V. Sorrells of the Secret Service arrived. Forrest Sorrells, according to my analysis, is without a question one of the insiders in the assassination conspiracy, for the cover-up at least. At about the same time, Willis stated Mr. Forrest V. Sorrells of the Secret Service arrived and inquired of the Eastman Kodak Processing Laboratory concerning any film received by them taken at the site and at the time of the assassination of President Kennedy. About 1/2 hour after arriving at the Eastman Kodak Processing Laboratory, Willis advised both his and Zapruder's film had been developed, and he, his wife, Mr. Zapruder, and Mr. Sorrells viewed both his film and Zapruder's film. So here, Phil Willis is one of the very few people who got to see Zapruder's film on the first day, on the day of the assassination, or the day after. Very few people saw that film, and Phil Willis was one of the people who did. Sorrells viewed both his film and Zapruder's film. Following this, Willis stated Mr. Sorrells asked if he could borrow Willis's film, and Willis stated he turned the film over to Mr. Sorrells. So before Willis even takes his own photographs home, he has given them to the Secret Service. Willis stated around the latter part of December 1963 or early January 1964, Mr. Sorrells returned his film to him. So, Willis didn't even have his own film for 1 or 2 months after the assassination. It was in the possession of the Secret Service or anyone the Secret Service decided to give it to. He said he does not know what use Soros made of his film or if it had been viewed by the President's Commission. Willis stated he has determined very few pictures were taken covering the last few seconds of President Kennedy's life, and he decided to make the ones he took available to the general public. With this in mind, Willis stated he engaged the law firm of Phil Pitt, Steininger, and Pretty, and dealt with Mr. Steininger, a copyright attorney. Willis said he secured a copyright on a series of 12 pictures that he had taken at the assassination site and incorporated under the name Phil Willis Enterprises, Incorporated. He said and that's that. So, Phil Willis gets to cash in on the assassination. I don't know how much money he made by selling his slides, but he immediately went into action. Well, after he got his pictures back, at least. We don't have exactly the timeline involved with him contacting the attorneys, but he immediately incorporated. He incorporated to do this. When you incorporate, you protect your private assets from your company's assets. And so I don't know how much money he made, but he cashed in after the assassination, on the assassination, just like Zapruder did, but probably not as lucratively as Zapruder did. I find this to be interesting. This is from the HSCA in 1978, talking about the Willis slides, the Willis photographs. Apparently, there's a missing Willis slide. Missing Willis slide. Willis had accidentally destroyed his original of slide. He said the FBI made a copy of after the assassination. Willis had accidentally destroyed his original of a slide. He said the FBI made a copy of after the assassination. It does not identify here which slide this is. Well, it's the one that the FBI made a copy of, but I don't know which one that is. I don't know everything. I don't know if that information is available. He requested we locate FBI's copy and make a copy for him. No record at FBI of particular he described. A particular slide he described. FBI records show FBI made only copies of Willis's original 12 slides. So apparently we do not know, we meaning those of us not inside in the government of the cover-up, or Phil Willis, we don't know which slide it was that Willis accidentally destroyed the original of. But I suspect it's this one, or the one this one comes from, the Willis 5 photo, the one taken immediately before JFK is first shot. And the reason I suspect it's this one is because I found 2 different versions online, and one of them shows something up at the Overpass. Here I've got an enlargement of a detail that shows up where I say the Overpass shooter was, and you can see something there. It looks like maybe the light or some light is reflecting off of the barrel of the rifle, perhaps. But that's in one version. In the other version, the one the 6th Floor Museum happens to have, there apparently is nothing there. But in one version, I forget where I got that. That was probably from Life magazine. It looks like there's probably somebody there holding something that's pointing at the president just before he was shot. So I'm very suspicious that this is the original slide, or the original of this slide is the one that Phil Willis accidentally destroyed. And that makes me suspicious of Phil Willis. in addition to some other things that I've mentioned. So while I suspect that Phil Willis was a conspiracy tool, I don't mean to suggest that he was knowingly involved in a plot to murder the president. I don't think he was. I don't think he would have been. I think he was too decent a fellow to have been voluntarily or knowingly involved in a plot to assassinate the president. I don't think he would have done that. And I made this little diagram here to demonstrate the kind of thing I think was going on. The conspiracy circles, I guess I could call this, is in green there. I think there's a Cuban conspiracy to murder the president that involves Oswald and Tippit. That is, that they both belong to this conspiracy. They know they belong to it, and their goal is to murder the president. And I think there's an American intelligence conspiracy, which I haven't read here, and I call CIA. That might not be the best name for it, but I want to keep things simple. The CIA conspiracy intersects with the Cuban conspiracy in that Jack Ruby and Jack Lawrence, both of them, I believe, are knowingly in the CIA conspiracy, and yet they're interacting with Oswald as if they are in the Cuban conspiracy. That is, Oswald thinks they're in it with him in the Cuban conspiracy. That's the way I visualize this. And Ruby happens to be in three circles here. I think within the CIA conspiracy, there's a group of people who think that there's a sting operation going on. They know something's going on, but they don't know it's the murder of the president. They think it's setting up a commie, a dirty, rotten traitor, Oswald. I think that's what's going on here. And I think Willis is in that conspiracy, but that he's not interacting with Oswald. He doesn't have any of this. He's probably in what the sting conspiracy is. That is, he probably thinks the FBI or the government is setting up a sting operation here to catch a dirty commie. That's what I think. But he doesn't interact with Oswald or Tippit as a communist the way that I think Ruby and Lawrence did. So I think Ruby and Lawrence know a lot more what's going on. Now, the way I've got it here, I'm saying Ruby doesn't know they're going to assassinate the president. But if I think Lawrence is the Overpass shooter, then of course Lawrence must know that he's assassinating the president. Otherwise, he wouldn't shoot the president. So, and it could be a more complicated bunch of conspiracy circles than even this is. But this is the way I visualize it, the way I think it's most likely. And so I've got Willis in the group of people, and I think there's a lot of people there. I think Zapruder is also in that think a sting operation is going on, and they're not expecting that the president is going to be murdered. So I'm not saying Willis is so depraved that he would participate in a conspiracy to murder the president. I think he's being used by the conspiracy to murder the president. And next we have this fascinating document where the names are redacted. I got this from the Harold Weisberg archive, and he had it filed under Jack Lawrence, even though Jack Lawrence's name does not appear on the document. He had it filed under Jack Lawrence. And that, of course, has biased my opinion of it. It has prejudiced me into thinking it is about Jack Lawrence. Now, probably the reason Weisberg had it filed under Jack Lawrence is because of where this interview took place. That is, it took place in Charleston, West Virginia. Jack Lawrence, at this time, lives in South Charleston, West Virginia. Technically, that's a different city, but it's adjacent to Charleston. And he actually worked in Charleston. So it would make sense since, as far as I know anyway, and probably as far as Weisberg knew, the only person of interest to the assassination investigation living in Charleston or working in Charleston was Jack Lawrence. So maybe that's why Weisberg thought that this had to do with Jack Lawrence, even though Jack Lawrence's name does not appear on the document. And here I have inserted names That is the name of Jack Lawrence and Phil Willis, and it works very well. Now, I don't have the same exact font that the typewriter was using, so what I did was I measured out in the document here how many the space that a certain number of letters would take up for the names I put in and the information I put in, and then I typed it and sized it with my program so that the same number of letters would take up the same amount of space as they do in the original document, even though the font is different. So what I inserted there takes the same linear space that would have been taken up by the original typewriter, and it works. Jack Lawrence and Phil Willis, it works. So what I'm going to do here is read this with my inserted names and go over the details of it. Enclosed for Dallas is one photograph of Jack Allen Carroll Lawrence. And I think that is probably where this photograph comes from, and I'll get back to the topic of this photograph. Enclosed for Los Angeles is one copy of reference Dallas Airtel. The following investigation was conducted by Special Agents Leon Ross Graben, or Special Agent, I don't know why there's two A's, Leon Ross Graben at Charleston, West Virginia. Attempts to contact Jack Allen Carroll Lawrence, 144 10th Avenue on 121 and 2264 met with negative results. On 12364, Jack Allen Carroll Lawrence, 144 10th Avenue, advised he has had no personal contact with Philip L. Willis since last interviewed by Special Agent Graben. He stated he had received a letter from Willis, dated 12/15/63, from China Lake, California, in which he advised him not to mention to anyone what he had told him when they met in Charleston. Lawrence said he assumed Willis was referring to the statement that he was going to hear something that is going to shock the country. He said Willis also mentioned that he was going to Reno for the holidays and would be in Los Angeles after the first of the year and could be located through a friend not identified at an address, Avenue, Los Angeles 6, California. He said Willis made no mention to his activity in China Lake or what he would be doing in Los Angeles. And I find this China Lake reference to be very interesting because China Lake is a naval air weapons station. And Phil Willis was an airman who served in World War II. So it wouldn't be surprising that Phil Willis might go to China Lake if they were going to be having some kind of an event there. Phil Willis is the kind of guy who remained active in his, I don't know what you'd say, but he would involve himself in things that were nostalgic for World War II and celebrating the U.S. military, the Air Force. There was no Air Force in World War II. It was the branches had their own air services. It wasn't until after World War II that the Air Force became a thing on its own. So it would make sense that Willis might have been going to China Lake. Perhaps there was some event going on there. And the FBI asking Jack Lawrence, as I say, about what Willis was planning to do there might have indicated that they were concerned that he might be talking with other people about the assassination. Anyway, the Naval Air Station at China Lake, here we look at, this is from the Google Maps. It shows the Naval Air Weapons Station there, and it shows a little town there. And it looks like the main attraction at this location is the Naval Air Weapons Station. That is, it seems unlikely that anybody would be going to China Lake who was not involved with the Naval Air Station there. It seems, it's not like it's a tourist destination. You wouldn't be going there unless you had something to do with the military base or servicing the military base. That's the way it looks to me. I'm sure there's a few things that go on there that don't have to do with the military base, but it looks like a town that exists primarily to serve the military base, and it's not a tourist destination unless you're in the military. So I think that makes sense with my interpretation of these redactions. That is, it could very well be Phil Willis. His name fits into the document, and he's the sort of person who might be going to China Lake. And now I want to get to the photograph of Jack Lawrence. In this redacted document, it says enclosed for Dallas is one photograph of, and I say, Jack Allen Carroll Lawrence. So I'm saying that this photograph of Jack Lawrence was taken by the FBI at the time of this interview with Jack Lawrence. But there is an official story of the photograph which differs from my interpretation. And this comes from an article written by Tom Bethel for the Washington Monthly, March 1975. The name of his article apparently was Sirhan on the Grassy Knoll? And I think that reveals the mocking tone of the article. That is, Tom Bethel is mocking Jim Garrison. Tom Bethel was an investigator for Jim Garrison during the Garrison investigation. I believe a lot of people say that he was a CIA plant. I haven't studied the matter well enough to have a strong opinion about that, but I wouldn't be surprised, especially with his retrospective attitude here. He's obviously working for the shills by the time he wrote this article in 1975. So I'm going to read this excerpt because it describes the story, the official story, of where the photograph of Jack Lawrence comes from. Garrison, I think, was annoyed by how little notice the press took of the Bradley arrest, and so, like an addict who finds his previous dose insufficient, he demanded more. I was dispatched to West Virginia to interview, and above all to photograph, one Jack Lawrence, who had been in Dallas on the day of the assassination. He had also worked in the automobile dealership where the second Oswald put in one of his ghostly appearances. Lawrence had left work early on the morning of the assassination. He told the FBI he had gone home to rest and had even parked his car somewhere in the area of the now infamous Grassy Knoll bordering Dealey Plaza. Some of the salesmen at the automobile agency had told me they thought Lawrence had mentioned something about having been in New Orleans at some point. The plan, therefore, was to get pictures of Jack Lawrence to show our witnesses in New Orleans, some of whom were remarkably adept at making identifications, especially if they had narcotics or other charges hanging over their heads. And then, who knows, a third conspiracy to assassinate the president might well be in the works. Before leaving D.C., I rented a camera. It was one of those affairs with a telescopic lens about a foot long. My knowledge of how to use it was only approximate, and as I fiddled about with the contraption, trying to make it work, I remember thinking how sorely I lacked the expertise of the agency boys over at Langley, whom Garrison was always expatiating on, and who, no doubt, had me in their surveillance at that very moment and were laughing their heads off. Yeah, I think he's laughing his head off as he writes this. Lady Jean arrived, and we drove off to the mountains in a rented car. An eminently sensible and practical woman, she had brought along an Instamatic camera. Her plan was for us simply to knock on Lawrence's door and pose as reporters writing a book about the assassination. After hours of driving through the mountains in a snowstorm, we reached Charleston. Lawrence was indeed at home, something I had gambled on. He was quite willing to talk to us, and as he did so, his wife dangled a baby in her lap. It was quite clear to Gene Campbell and myself that his involvement in the assassination was non-existent. This doesn't seem very logical to me. The fact that his wife has a baby means he wasn't involved in the assassination? I don't know, but I think Tom Bethel is selling a particular line here. Then came the irony I savor to this day. Lawrence told us that he was beginning to suspect a conspiracy. It was he who brought it up, not us. I remember he took us into a back room where he showed us a shelf of blue-colored paperback books of the type put out by very conservative publishing houses. These books proved to his satisfaction that there was some kind of a leftist conspiracy in the United States. However, I couldn't help reflecting that in his case, his ideas were not entirely paranoid. There really was a reckless DA 1,000 miles away contemplating arresting him. He permitted Lady Jean to snap a picture, which came out fine, and which was happily not identified back in New Orleans. Garrison, I think, was not entirely pleased with my negative report, but his staff, which was beginning to get fed up with filing charges against unknown individuals in various parts of the country, was delighted. Sometimes I think that this trip to West Virginia was one of the few useful things I accomplished during my period with Garrison. So here, Tom Bethel is putting it out, making it public, publishing the fact that it was Lady Jean who took the photograph of Jack Lawrence, not the FBI. But Sheldon Incoll covered this topic with Jack Lawrence, and this is what he wrote about it. Tom Bethel, doing investigative work for Jim Garrison, and Jean Campbell, that's Lady Jean, and she's a lady now because she married this lord here, an ex-wife of author Norman Mailer, misrepresented themselves to Lawrence on the morning of January 12, 1968, as reporters doing follow-ups on the Warren Report, who had been assigned one of the volumes which Lawrence appears in. In Bethel's report to Garrison, dated January 17th, Lawrence appeared to have no idea that he was an object of suspicion. According to Bethel, Lawrence even consented to having his photograph taken. And this is the only picture of Lawrence to have been published in assassination literature. Lawrence told me, however, that he consented to no such thing, and that any photographs of him were taken without his knowledge. So apparently, Jack Lawrence is saying that when this photograph was taken, he was not aware of it, if you can believe that. The photo does appear to be posed. Yeah, no shit. This is only one of 9 contradictions between this interview and statements Lawrence made to the FBI and myself. I forwarded a copy of Bethel's memo to Lawrence in the hopes that he could account for these discrepancies. He did so by writing that Bethel confuses and blends inaccurately the information I gave him. For example, Lawrence does remember saying that Castro at the time of the Cuban Revolution was the George Washington of his country, not a Robin Hood, as Bethel reported him to say. He's not a good note-taker, I agree with Lawrence. He's not a good note-taker. I agree with Lawrence. My wife believes Bethel or Campbell filched a family snapshot from an album on the coffee table in our home. If you can believe that. So apparently Jack Lawrence is saying that without his knowledge, Bethel or Lady Jean stole a family photograph out of an album that was sitting on the coffee table. Yes, it's laughable. I phoned Bethel on January 11th, 1992, and asked him about the photograph. Bethel told me that they did have Lawrence's permission to take a photo, but he could not recall whether it was he or Campbell who took the picture. So Bethel can't remember what he had said before, as I read in the 1975 thing he wrote. He can't remember 17 years ago whether he took the picture or not. And it's easier to forget whether he took the picture or not if the whole thing's a lie, because he's forgetting what he made up. He's not remembering the actual event. And so I think it is a lie. And I think Jack Lawrence confirms it's a lie that Bethel told, but that Jack Lawrence himself lies because they're hiding a secret. And that secret is that the FBI took that photo back in 1964. It wasn't Lady Jean in 1968. And that's the lie, is to cover up the fact that this redacted document is actually from an interview with Jack Lawrence about Phil Willis. The whole thing was concocted. This photograph we have had to have an explanation, and had to have an explanation other than the FBI took it as a result of this interview, because that would reveal that the interview is with Jack Lawrence. And they don't want us to know that, because then we'd figure out who the other guy is, and that the other guy has to be Phil Willis. See, I think this is a cover-up ruse, and it was still going on years after the assassination. And they have to cover this up because they can't let us know that Phil Willis had gone to Charleston to talk to Jack Lawrence and to say that he's going to be hearing something that's going to shock the country. I mean, we would have to know more about that, wouldn't we? We would have to know why Phil Willis is visiting Jack Lawrence in Charleston. Well, they don't even know each other, even though they work at the same place. You see, they can't. If I'm right, that is, if I've got these redactions correct, and who these people are, that is, it's Jack Lawrence and Phil Willis, if I'm right, they can't let us know that, because that reveals a conspiracy, even if Phil Willis wasn't knowingly involved. And in fact, that makes more sense here, because it sounds like Phil Willis just found out something. That is, that it was an inside job, and that's what's going to shock the country. And that he's had a talk with Jack Lawrence, whom he sees as a fellow conspirator, but to Willis, Lawrence is a fellow conspirator in this sting operation, probably, not in an attempt to murder the president. That is, Willis wasn't involved, as far as he knew, he wasn't involved with a plot to murder the president. And he assumes that Jack Lawrence wasn't either. When I say Jack Lawrence knew better, and that's how the FBI finds out they have to deal with Willis here. And presumably they did go and have a talk with Willis, and therefore, or they or somebody talked to Willis and gave him a story that Willis was able to accept. And probably the story was that the sting operation went bad and Oswald just killed the president anyway, and that's not the truth. But that was probably the story they gave Willis. And how can Willis might think it's better for the nation not to reveal that supposed truth. Willis is the kind of guy who'd want to do what's right for the country, I think. And if he was convinced of that, then he would go along with the cover-up. And I think that's probably what happened. They probably talked to him, and he was willing to go along with the cover-up. But if we know that Willis is visiting Jack Lawrence in Charleston, then we're going to know that they were involved in something prior to the assassination. And they're communicating with each other afterwards as fellow conspirators. And we would also have to know what it was that Willis said was going to shock the country. And so they want to hide. They have to hide that this is Lawrence and Willis. And therefore they have to make up this story about how that photograph was taken. That it was taken by Lady Jean Campbell and not by the FBI. And one more point about this redacted document. It says here that Lawrence, as I say, has had no personal contact with Phil Willis, as I say, since last interviewed by Special Agent Graben. He stated he had received a letter from Willis dated 12/15/63 from China Lake. And we know from the documents available that the last interview that Lawrence had with Graben which included Graben, was on December 11th. So the timing of this all makes sense with Lawrence and Willis. If the last time that Graben interviewed Lawrence was December 11th, and since that time he's received a letter dated December 15th from Phil Willis, then that all makes sense in the timing of the documents and what it says in the redacted document. It makes sense if it's Lawrence and Willis being talked about here. So after working out all of that and coming to that conclusion, I came across this document, which apparently is an unredacted version of this redacted document. And it's got different names from what I concluded the names would be. It's got Leslie Chester Hollinsworth instead of Jack Allen Carroll Lawrence. And it's got Buster D. Mitchell instead of Philip Willis. So it would seem that my interpretation of the redacted document is wrong. And if you put these two documents side by side, as I have done here, you can see that the format is different, so it's not literally the same document, but the typing on it appears to be exactly the same. That is, as if one of them is an original and the other is a carbon copy onto a different form. And perhaps that's the way these Airtel things worked. So I don't know what to think now. There are some other documents that pertain to Leslie Hollinsworth, and he turns out to be a cook, apparently, who apparently works at China Lake as a cook on the military base, and yet lives in Los Angeles, making it for about a 159-mile commute to be a cook at a military base. I'm very suspicious that a false paper trail was created here to explain the redacted document, all in an effort to hide the fact that Willis and Lawrence were in cahoots, but I can understand why a reasonable person would disagree, or could disagree. It's certainly not beyond the ability of the FBI to fake a paper trail, so I wouldn't be surprised if my first conclusion is correct, but I really don't know. So I think I'll wrap this thing up now with a few questions and answers. Why did the FBI and why do the shills want this downtown Lincoln Mercury customer to not be Oswald? And my proposed answer is because the story that Oswald was going to buy the car with cash makes it look as though Oswald is part of a conspiracy and expects a big payoff. And the shills and the cover-up don't want a conspiracy. They're selling a lone nut story. So anything that hints at a conspiracy is they're going to oppose. And so they want this story to go away. They want people to believe that was not Oswald at the Lincoln Mercury dealership, because he being there implies a conspiracy, that he's expecting a big payday soon, presumably when the president is killed. But they would rather have it be Oswald than be somebody impersonating Oswald. Which brings us to the next question. Why did the FBI and why do the shills want this customer to not be somebody impersonating Oswald? Because that would mean a conspiracy by definition, because there would be another person pretending to be Oswald, and that means there's a conspiracy. And they don't want a conspiracy. They want this to be a lone nut job. So they would much rather this customer have been Oswald than somebody pretending to be Oswald. And Bugliosi said as much in his tome. And but I think they would rather that you just forget about this, because it's a very credible sighting of somebody who looks like Oswald and is using Oswald's name. So it's either a very sophisticated impersonation, that is someone presumably who's been made up to look like Oswald, saying he's Oswald, which would mean not only a conspiracy, but it would very strongly imply that some kind of intelligence agency is behind the job, and they certainly don't want that. Or it's really Oswald, and that has its problems, as I've already said. And that's why the FBI went to, as I mentioned in this video, they went to some lengths to make it seem as though Lawrence had called the day after the assassination, because that allows them to have a reasonable explanation for not being able to find the business card with Oswald's name on it, because it had been thrown away. I didn't go over the FBI investigation into that, but when they went there the next day, the business card could not be located because it had been emptied. The trash can had been emptied into a larger trash receptacle of some kind. And the business card could not be found. The business card that had Oswald's name on it. And that's the FBI trying to make it seem as though that this didn't even really happen with somebody calling himself Oswald. That the sales people are confused. It wasn't the name Oswald, and that it was just somebody else. And they put it together with Oswald after this president was shot. That's what they want you to think, and that's why they pretended that Lawrence called them the day after the assassination. And the last question here: if Jack Lawrence was a conspiracy tool, as I say he was, then why did he call the FBI? If the FBI doesn't want this story to be known or believed, why would Jack Lawrence call the FBI? And I think in this conspiracy, people weren't being micromanaged every day, every morning. They were just given their job and sent on their way and expected to do it. And I think Lawrence probably thought that the plan was to blame Oswald as part of a Cuban or leftist plot. And in fact, as I read, according to Tom Bethel, Jack Lawrence was very amenable to a leftist plot, having been behind the assassination. And there's other people who say he was a right-wing kook, and that would be consistent also. And also, if he was involved, as I think he was, he would probably be a right-wing kook involved in a plot to murder the president, and I think that was the case. So he would have been very happy to blame Oswald as part of a leftist conspiracy, had someone not told him that we're not going to do that. And people are only told what they need to know in intelligence operations. They don't know the big picture. They're just told what their job is. And sometimes whoever's telling a person what his job is might not know everything that might happen, and therefore is not going to give the full story to the tool, the conspiracy tool. So I think that's probably the explanation here, that Lawrence probably thought that the plan was to blame Oswald as part of a Cuban or a leftist plot, and that's why he called the FBI, so that they would know that he had been here shopping for a car, expecting to be able to pay cash for it. And that is that the Cubans, or the leftists, or whoever he thought was going to be blamed, was going to be paying off Oswald, and this would be evidence for that.